Greetings, DFG here. You know, life at times puts us in situations that, quite frankly, are unfair. A lot of times, situations that are very imbalanced. And I want to share with you, a story about myself years ago as a little boy. And I share this story because it's a self-help story, and it's a story that I think that can do some men, women, a lot of good in terms of when it's what's in your hands. What do you have in your hands? What resources do you have available to you when change is absolutely necessary, but resources are limited or not available at all? And my story is a story of a 10-year-old boy living in the dangerous, at that time, housing projects of New Orleans, Louisiana. And it was in an area that was heavily infiltrated with drugs, a lot of violence, a very crowded community. There were very few positive male role models. I mean, there were, older men, teenagers, young men, some still at home with their mothers, and some who had been there in the project system. It's almost like the prison system from generations. Some of them were the children of children of children who just kind of inherited the apartment that they were living in. The government didn't necessarily know that they were there because all the time the local government, the local state authorities, housing authorities didn't realize that the parents were deceased and the children were now, adults and living in those homes. And to get to the point of the story and why I share this story around the fact that there comes a time that you have to do whatever it is you have to do to change your circumstances. And I want to qualify that because that's not taking a position to harm others, because you'll have people say, well, I'm struggling out here in these streets and I got to go out and I got to use drugs, and not use drugs, but sell drugs. And sometimes use drugs to I guess the word would be to dull your senses so that you don't truly feel the human consequences of behavior when you go out and commit acts of violence on other people. So I'm not condoning, any type of criminal activity when I talk about sometimes you have to do what you have to do. Although there are those rare occasions where that your behavior might be on the borderline or maybe even cross that line in terms of what the justice system considers a criminal behavior or not criminal behavior. And I'll give you an example of, and just for you Christians out there, I'll say believers, because the Christianity thing, I still struggle, with that because I'm not sure what Christianity is. I know what belief in God is, and I know that Yeshua is the Savior of mankind. I'm crystal clear on who He is and what He was, and He is and was and still and always will be God. But that being said, that when you look in terms of even from a Yeshua Christianity perspective, I'll use it. Christ was considered a criminal. He was considered a rabble rouser. He was considered a nonconformist, an agitator. You could go as far to call him, a resistor, someone who was constantly leading protests against the establishment. All those things are in the gospel, so you can go back and you can take a look at it. He was rejected, in his own country, in his own town, own home. And for no more reason than he was taking a stand against what he knew was injustice. But that leads me deep into my story. And my story was a situation of being, one of 8 children being raised by a single parent in the housing projects of New Orleans. And I remember that in my environment, there was, again, a lot of drugs. And we as little kids were being exposed to some of the most hostile things that you could not imagine. And that's one of the reasons why I say all the time, fathers, you need to go home and really find out what's going on with your children and be there to protect those children and watch over them, because not having a father in the home with me at that age exposed me and my siblings to everything, to some of them, to sexual abuse, and all of us to different degrees of drug abuse. And I did say drug abuse at 8, 9, 10 years old. And I will tell you that, we had a neighbor upstairs from us, and he was a teenager, and he had introduced me and my siblings to literally inhaling lighter fluid. The time they called it sniffing lighter fluid. And some of you guys may have heard me talk about this. I was talking to a good friend of mine just recently, a co-worker of mine, and I was telling him this story, how that we were using the drugs, sniffing lighter fluid, getting high off of lighter fluid, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, right under my mother's nose. Because see, a mother can be one who can provide, care for the children. She could be a provider in terms of resources and income for children. But sometimes that instinct to really understand the minds of boys can be a little bit challenging, because in order to really understand that, you almost have to be that, at least have some experiences that could relate to those thought processes. But we were sniffing, lighter fluid and getting high. And I realized that at the age that I was in the middle group, middle of the family. I was number 4 of 8 children. And I remember thinking to myself, if something did not change, we would end up, all of us, drug addicts. Even at 19 years old, I understood the consequences that if something did not change, if I didn't take my life and the life of my siblings, especially the younger ones, if I didn't take charge of what was the direction we were going in, that we would have probably all been dead before our time, and probably, every other terrible consequence leading up to a premature death. And, my mother struggled with a lot of self-identity issues, mainly because she had 8 kids, no husband, and more or less a young woman. And, she didn't want to feel old, and she had a hard time, finding a mate, because there weren't too many men who were willing to take upon a woman with, 8 children. And living in the housing projects and going through the experiences that we were going through, my mother would, from time to time, drink too much alcohol. And everything from, threatening to burn the house down to in some cases, being very, very harsh on some of my siblings. And I love my mother. You've heard me talk about my mother. I think my mother was a great woman, but my mother was a human being. And so, and a human being that struggled with a lot of human issues, especially when it come down to, to neglect, rejection, etc. But anyway, she had drank too much one particular night, and we were out. Had taken us out with her, visiting some of her friends. And then I remember us coming home that night, and we were sitting outside of the building, and my mother noticed a light going in and out of the house, going off and on in the kitchen window. And my mother had made the assumption that there was a burglar in the house. And I remember sitting there, and I'm looking real curious out of the car window with everybody else, and it dawned on me that it was not a burglar in the house, but it was literally the doorway leading into the apartment, that the wind was blowing back and forth, which gave the perception, or the illusion that someone was actually turning on and off the light switch. And I remember telling my mother, once I figured out what was really going on, saying, "You're absolutely right. There is somebody in the house. There is something going on, Mama. You are right." And I knew that was my one opportunity. That was my one moment to bring about a change inside of my life, the lives of my siblings, because had I not did that, we would have exaggerated that, or quite frankly, misled my mother, or encouraged her deception by telling her that it was someone there when I knew there was not anybody there. I knew it was the doorway going. But a week later, we had moved out of the housing projects, and we were living in a community, or a better community. I mean, we were still a low-income community, but we were around people who had homes, and men who took care of their families, and entrepreneurs, etc. And it changed the trajectory of our lives, and in particular, my life. And I share that story with you because there are many times situations that you find yourself in, you almost find yourself, you feel hopeless in them. And whether you're a 9-year-old little boy or you're a 45-year-old man or a 22-year-old man trying to get started, and trying to become self-sufficient and independent. And it can look hopeless to you. But the thing that you should always remember is always stay in the moment and always look for that opportunity, because that opportunity will come knocking on your door. And if you're ready at that time, you will be able to walk through that door. So regardless of what's going on, how terrible, horrific your circumstances may be, because with the exception of one brother, I didn't lose any of my siblings. They're all still alive today. And the reason the one brother is as long as really because of a disease that shortened his life, had nothing to do with drug abuse. So, but, looking and being prepared and being, alert when that opportunity comes knocking on your door could be all the difference in the world. And I knew we need to get out of it. When you're in a jam, you need to be thinking in terms of, okay, how am I preparing myself? What am I putting into myself? What am I studying? What am I reading? Who am I exposing myself to? What's the environment I'm allowing myself to be in? Do I believe there's something greater than myself? Because if you can come to those revelations, or you can come to a place of peace about that, then I guarantee you the opportunity that you're looking for is going to come knocking on your door. I think of a scripture in the Gospels of St. Luke 4:23, and it tells where Jesus goes up, or Yeshua goes up to this man. I say Jesus because some of you guys may not know what I mean when I say Yeshua. But Yeshua goes up to these people who are challenging him about his authenticity and about what his abilities were. And he looks at them and says, you know what? There comes a time when a physician needs to heal yourself. Or as the proverb goes, physician, heal yourself. In other words, you take responsibility for your ailment. You do something about your ailment. And because if you're not willing to do it, it's going to be very difficult for others to feel that it's important enough for you to help you when you won't even do it for yourself. The last thing I'll say, and even when I think in terms of, the murder rates and all these different things that are current issues in a lot of the inner cities. I was just looking at some statistics yesterday. The city of New Orleans, my hometown, in the last 6 years, over 1,000 murders and combined murders and gunshots, 3,500. And and it's really sad. And 92% of it was black on black, and 87% of it was male on male violence. And you can't walk away from that, regardless of how you feel about what's going on, with the national government, how you feel about what's going on, with the police force, how you feel about what's going on with racism. You cannot deny or walk away from the fact that if people of color, in this particular case, black people, feel that it's okay to murder one another, you're going to have a hard time convincing anyone that your life, really matters. And so when it comes down to fixing the problem or dealing with it or looking for an opportunity to change, that opportunity is always in front of you if you're willing to embrace it, if you're willing to be honest about it. And sometimes you got to do what I did as a 9-year-old. You got to kind of get right close to that line and say, you know what? Although I knew what I was doing was wrong, I knew if I did not make that decision, nothing would happen. And so every now and then you got to kind of move the little checker, when the guy turns his head, if you can say it that way. But not to hurt, not to harm, but if it can do a little bad or a little negativity to accomplish a greater good, then you do what's necessary. Okay? So to all of you in the African American community, and also our white Anglo-Saxon brothers and sisters, I just want you to know that some of us are conscious. We realize that we have some skin in the game as it relates to the criminal behavior and the injustice that's going on in America. Now, ultimately, we didn't start this fight. We become somewhat induced and drawn into the fight, and unfortunately, we have now allowed ourselves to become, victims, internal victims and external victims when you count the hostilities that surround a lot of people of color from some of our white counterparts, okay? So we all got something to do, we all can do, but first of all, we have to come to the place of personal responsibility, personal accountability, and make that change. All right? Hope that helps. Be ready, be prepared, study, put something in if you want to be able to get something out. You never know when your moment will come. Just like the door opening and closing, it changed the lives of me and it changed the lives of my siblings. Now you know, DFG, thank you for listening. Gideon's Flight.